The signal arrived in a whisper, hidden within the static hum of the cosmos. It was buried so deep in the background noise that it took months for Earth's top radio astronomers to isolate and confirm its artificial nature. At first, they thought it was an anomaly, a natural burst, a miscalculation. But as the pattern emerged, the realization struck with the weight of history itself. Humanity was not alone. The message was unlike anything ever encountered. It was neither mathematical nor linguistic, but something in between, a pulse of structured energy that defied traditional decryption. A team of linguists, astrophysicists, and computer scientists worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments until, at last, a response could be crafted. A single pulse, echoing the original signal, was sent back into the void. The reply came swiftly. A ship materialized in the blackness beyond Mars, a monolithic structure of interwoven metal and living tissue, stretching kilometers in every direction. It did not arrive in a flash of light or a roar of engines, but in eerie silence, as if it had always been there. The world held its breath. Every government, every military, every eye turned toward the invader. 12 were chosen. They were the finest humanity had to offer. Diplomats, scientists, and military strategists, representing a united Earth. Among them was Colonel Elias Vance, a veteran of terrestrial wars, his experience with first contact protocols making him an obvious choice. Dr. Anya Patel, a linguist whose groundbreaking work in computational language theory had made her a key player in decoding the alien transmissions. And Director Harlan Reese, a man who had spent his life brokering peace between nations, now tasked with brokering peace between species. The meeting was to take place aboard the alien vessel, an unprecedented step into the unknown. The world watched as the delegation launched from the Martian orbital station, their shuttle a speck of fragile human engineering against the alien monolith. Upon approach, the vessel responded, an aperture irising open to accept them. The darkness within swallowed them whole. At first, all seemed well. The Ziphrans, as they identified themselves, were unlike anything the human mind could have imagined. Their forms were fluid yet rigid, their bodies a fusion of organic and synthetic, pulsing with unseen energies. They did not walk but shifted, their movement an unsettling blend of grace and unpredictability. Communication was a challenge, but not impossible. The Ziphrans did not speak in words, but in frequencies, subtle shifts in resonance that translated into meaning. With painstaking precision, Dr. Patel began to bridge the gap, each exchange signal a step toward understanding. Then something changed. The air grew heavier, as if charged with static. The Ziphrans' shimmering bodies stiffened, their undulating forms rigid with something that could only be described as intent. Reese was the first to notice, his voice a careful warning in the earpieces of the others. "We need to go. Now." Too late. Without warning, the Ziphrans struck. The fluidity of their forms became razor-sharp appendages, cutting through pressure suits, slicing flesh before the delegation had time to react. Blood splattered against the metallic walls, human screams swallowed by the vacuum of soundproof corridors. Colonel Vance drew his sidearm, his military instincts taking over. He fired, the muzzle flash illuminating the horror before him. Patel's lifeless body crumpled at his feet, Reese torn apart in a blur of silver and red. The shots did nothing. The Ziphrans were already upon him, a writhing mass of limbs and steel. Then silence. The live feed cut out. On Earth, billions had been watching, their screens filled with static where moments before had been the first human-alien meeting in history. The control room in Houston erupted into chaos, desperate voices shouting into dead comms, demanding answers that would never come. The 12 were gone. There was no warning, no explanation, just silence, vast and infinite. The Ziphrans sent a single message, broadcast across every frequency, in every language. Asterisk, this was a warning. Stay in your world. Asterisk. The words were simple. The meaning was clear. The response was inevitable. Within hours, the United Nations Security Council was in emergency session. Gone was the pretense of diplomacy. There was no discussion of peace, no debate on misunderstanding. The attack had been unprovoked, and humanity would not let it stand. General Adrian Holt, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces, stood before the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of history. "They think 12 lives are enough to break us." Her words rang through the chamber, through the screens of billions watching across the world. "They do not understand who we are." She turned to the war map displayed behind her, the vastness of space reduced to battle lines and strategic markers. They have made a mistake. The vote was unanimous. War had been declared. The first strike was a massacre. Humanity's fleet, hastily assembled from retrofitted exploration vessels and experimental warships, engaged the Ziphrans in orbit around Jupiter. It was not a battle. It was slaughter. The alien warships did not function like Earth's military constructs. They were fluid, adapting mid-combat, shifting configurations to counter human weapons before the first shots even landed. Missiles were intercepted before they could reach their targets, energy beams scattered uselessly against shields that seemed to hum with intelligence. Admiral Cade Mercer, commanding from the U.S. Vanguard, watched in grim silence as his fleet fell apart. The comms were a cacophony of desperate voices, pilots screaming, captains shouting orders that were obsolete before they were given. Ships erupted into plumes of fire, their remains pulled helplessly into Jupiter's gravity well. Humanity had miscalculated. The battle ended in less than an hour. What remained of the fleet was forced into retreat, limping back to the Martian defense perimeter. Reports estimated a 70% casualty rate. Millions gone in a blink. The Ziphrans did not pursue. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Earth was insignificant. The loss should have broken humanity. Instead, it hardened them. In underground bunkers and orbital research stations, scientists worked without rest. Engineers dissected every fragment of alien wreckage salvaged from the battlefield, searching for weaknesses. Military strategists pored over battle footage, searching for patterns. And deep within the intelligence archives, a discovery was made, one that would change the war. The Ziphrans were not invincible. They relied on something, a networked consciousness, an interconnected system that bound their forces together like a singular mind. This was their strength. And their weakness. Dr. Elias Rowe, a cyberneticist whose work had been deemed too dangerous for peacetime, was brought out of exile. He studied the Ziphran technology with the obsessive fervor of a man who had long waited for vindication. What he found was astonishing. They don't communicate the way we do, he explained to the War Council. His eyes burned with something between excitement and fear. They resonate. Every ship, every soldier is linked through frequencies we barely understand. But if we can disrupt it, he didn't need to finish the thought. Neural disruptors. The first test was conducted on Phobos, where a captured Ziphran drone was subjected to the prototype weapon. The moment the disruptor was activated, the drone convulsed, its shimmering form collapsing into chaos before going entirely still. It had worked. The counteroffensive was planned in a matter of days. This time, they would not fight on the enemy's terms. A task force was assembled, led once again by Admiral Mercer. His face was hollow, his eyes shadowed by the memory of Jupiter, but his voice was steady as he addressed his crew. "We are done reacting," he said, standing before the bridge of the Vanguard. "We take the fight to them." They struck at Saturn, where the Ziphrans had established a command presence. The disruptors were deployed with ruthless precision. In an instant, the enemy fleet, once a seamless force of destruction, fractured. Their ships flailed, uncoordinated, pilots severed from the collective intelligence that guided them. Humanity did not hesitate. The retaliation was swift, merciless. Ziphran vessels, once impenetrable, became fragile husks under the bombardment of human warships. The once invincible enemy was now vulnerable, and humanity made them suffer. For every life lost at Jupiter, 100 Ziphrans fell. The war had turned. Victory bred hunger. The generals, the politicians, the soldiers, none were satisfied with simply pushing the Ziphrans back. They wanted more. They wanted justice. They wanted revenge. The fleet pushed forward, chasing the enemy through their own territory. Ziphran colonies, once deemed untouchable, were reduced to burning wastelands. There were no negotiations. There were no prisoners. By the time the Armada reached the Ziphran homeworld, the war was no longer a battle for survival. It was annihilation. The final assault was planned with surgical precision. Every major city, every military outpost, every last vestige of the Ziphran Empire was targeted. Humanity had learned from its first failure. There would be no mistakes. Admiral Mercer stood on the command deck of the Vanguard, watching the world below through the reinforced glass. He could see it, vast and alien, a planet of towering spires and shifting landscapes, pulsating with the bioluminescent glow of a species that had once believed itself untouchable. A transmission came through. The voice was unlike the previous messages. There was no arrogance, no warning, only desperation. "We surrender." The words echoed through the silence of the bridge. Officers looked to Mercer, waiting. His expression did not change. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire." The order was carried out without hesitation. The first wave of orbital bombardment rained down, turning the Ziphran capital into fire and dust. Cities fell, one after another, a cascade of destruction that swallowed the planet whole. Their surrender had come too late. They had made a mistake. They had killed 12. Now humanity had killed millions. The sky over Zifra Prime was fire. The bombardment had turned the world into a graveyard of molten cities and shattered landscapes. The once glowing spires, the towering structures that had stretched toward the heavens, were now nothing more than blackened ruins. The air itself shimmered with the heat of devastation, the planet's very surface cracking beneath the weight of humanity's vengeance. Admiral Mercer watched in silence from the bridge of the Vanguard. Reports streamed in. Enemy resistance had collapsed, entire populations either incinerated in the bombardments or fleeing into the depths of underground tunnels that would soon be their tombs. The Zifran fleet was gone, their command structures erased in a matter of hours. What remained were scattered signals, broken transmissions filled with static and incomprehensible wails. There was no one left to fight. "We have confirmation," a lieutenant said, his voice carefully neutral. "The last strongholds have fallen. The planet is," he hesitated before finishing, "secure." Mercer closed his eyes. The words should have meant victory, but they felt hollow. On the surface, the Zifrans who had survived the initial assault stumbled through the wreckage of their world. Their forms, once fluid and luminous, were now dulled, their bodies flickering as though their very essence was unraveling. Some lay motionless, their neural links severed, their existence dependent on a network that no longer existed. Others wandered aimlessly, their once synchronized minds lost in an ocean of silence. They were broken. Dr. Elias Rowe stood inside one of the command dropships, his gaze fixed on the smoldering ruins below. His hands trembled, though not from fear. The sheer scale of destruction, the overwhelming success of the neural disruptors, was beyond even his calculations. "This is extinction," he murmured, barely audible over the hum of the ship. Beside him, General Adrian Holt said nothing. Her posture remained rigid, her expression unreadable. She had fought for this, pushed for it when others hesitated. And now, as the last embers of the Zifran Empire flickered and died, she felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, only the weight of finality. A transmission interrupted the silence. The voice on the other end was thin, weak. A Zifran, speaking through a barely functioning channel. "Enough." The single word crackled through the comms, its meaning unmistakable. Rowe moved toward the console, adjusting the frequency. "Who is this?" "Static, then. We are what remains." A pause. "We surrender." Holt's jaw tightened. Mercer, still watching from orbit, leaned forward. He could hear the tension in the silence that followed, the weight of the decision pressing against them all. The war was over. The Zifrans had nothing left to fight with, no means to resist. Their species, their civilization, everything had been reduced to ruins. If humanity chose, they could end it completely. Wipe them out, erase them from history as they had done to countless human lives. It would be easy. Holt exhaled slowly. She could hear the voices of the fallen in her mind, the 12 murdered at the first meeting, the millions lost to Jupiter, the nameless soldiers who had fought and died to bring them here. This was justice, wasn't it? Rowe turned to her. "We don't have to do this," he said, his voice quiet. "We've won." The weight of the war sat heavy on them all. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Mercer's voice came over the channel, firm, unwavering. "Finish it." The order traveled through the fleet in a matter of seconds. The final strike was launched, waves of precision ordnance sweeping across the surface, eradicating the last remaining Zifran enclaves. The transmission ceased. The cries of surrender were silenced. It was done. Earth had won. Back home, the celebrations began almost immediately. Cities erupted in light and sound, parades filled the streets, and the names of the fallen were etched into history. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, undefeated, unconquerable. But in the quiet corners of power, in the war rooms and command centers, the victors did not celebrate. Rowe returned to his lab, but the work held no meaning anymore. The neural disruptors had worked too well. There was no challenge left. No enemy to study. Just silence. Holt resigned her commission. The war was over, and with it, her purpose. She had spent years believing that victory would bring satisfaction, that vengeance would be enough. It wasn't. And Mercer, the man who had given the final order, never returned to Earth. He remained in the blackness of space, commanding a fleet that no longer had a war to fight. Zifra Prime was gone. The species that had once dared to challenge humanity had been reduced to ashes. And yet, as the dust settled and the echoes of war faded, an unspoken truth remained, gnawing at the edges of every triumphant speech and victory parade. Had humanity won? Or had they simply become the monsters they had sworn to defeat?